Hello, this is David Fletcher with Fletcher Fleet Sport in Fredericksburg, Texas. And we've been asked to do a pre-buy or pre-flight inspection prior to an annual. And that's what we're going to do right now is a walk around that would have the owner present at this time. And in other words, some of them just bring their airplanes in here and they drop them off. But this is kind of like a pre-flight inspection, but with the owner, and we'll find whatever we find, he'll know about before he leaves. So I'll get started right now. And what I want to do is cover all the details that are not necessarily in the checklist. Everybody has a Grumman checklist, but it was made 50 years ago. And so there's a lot of things that have happened to these airplanes in the last 50 years that are not there. And so we're going to do a little bit of research and show you some of the things that may not be caught on a typical either pre-purchase or a pre-flight. So I'm going to start with this airplane here and just a simple walk around. We're first going to look at the propeller, general condition of the leading edges in the back, make sure there's no strikes, and that's everybody knows that. I'm going to look at the prop gap, make sure it's okay. This particular one has John Charlema's seal inside to prevent air from blowing out of the seal. So that's one thing I can see from here, which is a good thing. It has a split cowling. We like that. First thing I notice is the strut fairing is missing. Those things are cheap. They're around $20, and they just bond on, so the labor to put them on is almost non-existent. So it does help. It'll save for gas. There's less drag, and it makes it look a lot better with that. It makes the little dinky nose strut look more secure. So look, I'll get to the engine a little later, but I'm just going to walk around the airplane on the outside. I'm not seeing stains here on the outside. Sometimes we see those where we have an active exhaust leak. That doesn't show up here. Walking around to see the general condition, I see a little crack up here in the wing root. This is a later airplane. It has the stronger roots. If this was a 72, 73 model, I would be concerned about that making contact with the top of the spar. In this airplane, I'm not concerned about it because it has a much stronger wing root. I'm going to check all the fairings, make sure that they're shock strut, they're shock mounted. This fiberglass fairing, it doesn't have the seal on it, so it's been replaced. This one should not be shock mounted; should be real solid. And got a dog helping me here. As I walk around this airplane, I see there's a few things missing. The fuel quantity and octane rating is missing, and that's a requirement. There should be fuel drains here with little arrows pointing at the two drains. That's missing. That needs to be done. Beautiful airplane, but there's certain things they should have done after they painted it. We have two stall strips, and they're secure. They're in good shape. I'm looking under here for fuel leaks, and I really don't see any. There might be a little bit on the trailing edge in the back, but the general condition looks very good. I don't see any repairs. I do see some smoking rivets on some of the inspection plates as I'm walking around. And what I want to do really is I'm covering this general inspection while the owner is here. He may stay with the airplane the whole time he's here because we do have sleeper rooms and courtesy cars, or he can choose to go back on the airline and we'll take him without charge to the airline terminal building. But before he leaves, I want to go over the airplane and see if there's any big issues with it. All of this looks good. He's got the deflectors for the strobe lights. Aileron travel looks very good. Later on, we'll get in to see if it was all assembled correctly, and there's some big issues with that. We'll get into that later. Got a nice sharp V-shaped trailing edge. It's missing the plugs. There should be a rubber plug in here to keep the water out, and it should have good drain holes. We'll always look, and during the inspection, we'll look a little more carefully at things like that. There should be open and multiple drain holes after each rib in the airplane. I'm going to look for steel rub strips for the flaps. That is a catastrophic problem with many airplanes. This one has aluminum, I can tell by looking at it, but if you have a magnet, that's always a good way to check. You want to check to see how much play is in the flaps. This is fairly normal. I'm pushing up and down on it. It's got about 2 degrees, and I don't see a big issue with that. I see there's a placard on the canopy that's missing. I would want to shake the steps to make sure there's no big issues with that. That can be a fairly major repair if they're breaking and making sounds. Also want to take the stabilizer and give it some fairly hard shake and make sure there's no crackling sounds in there. Normally you'll have an ELT placard that tells you have the breakaway cover here. There is an ELT in here, I understand, and the placard is missing for that, so we're going to do that. We'll put the placard on it. I'm going to look for delamination in these corners. That's real commonplace. There's none here, and somebody's covered this to keep the birds out, which, in my opinion, is a very, very good thing to do. I will hold this steady here and move this up and down, and I found about twice as much play as I should show. About a quarter of inch is, the inspection for that is more complicated than what I'm doing here, but I can tell it wouldn't pass that inspection just by moving that. It is excessive play. The other thing I want to do is grab the other side and hold it still and move one down. Now I'm gonna look at this elevator counterweight, and I'm gonna line it with the front of the stabilizer. If you move the camera over here and look at this other one, see, it's not lined up. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push it the other way, and then I'm gonna line this one up. And it moved back to where it was. It moved about 2 inches. Okay, so there's what's happening here. There's the bell crank holes that are loose, and what we'll do is run a G-reamer through it and put an oversized bolt. It'd be an NAS 6604 19X bolt that will give it about 1/64 of an inch larger, and that generally takes the play out, and you don't have to do anything to the torque tube except run the G-reamer through it. So that's our most economical way we know to fix that. Walking around here, there's no delamination. We're looking good. I want to shake the stabilizer. We've had them go bang bang before. That's good. I will typically look under the airplane for delamination on the side skins, and that will usually not be an issue. But with the certain serial numbers earlier, we want to look at them really good while the owner's here. This is a later airplane that's not going to have as many issues with it, although it could. We're going to look at the dorsal fin. This one's obviously a fiberglass. It didn't have any cracks in it. The original ones were plastic, and they would by now dry it out and have cracks. And it looks very nice. This flap always has more play in it than the other one. We may look at that because the flap motor's on the other side and it has to go through more moving parts to make it operate. So there's always a little more play on this side than there is on the other side. So we may look at that when we go in. Now, I've already walked down and looked at the trailing edge all the way down on the top and the bottom, and I didn't see any obvious delamination. But you really can't tell until we get in there and spend time on it. Again, we're just looking at this for the owner while he's here, and he's only got a few minutes, so I'm walking around this airplane. We hit a good solid stop bang on the ailerons. This all looks new. It's got an oversized sleeve in it. I can see it from there. Matter of fact, bring the camera in and shoot that. If the bearing is worn really badly, you'll see this has a new bearing support, and it has a stainless steel sleeve underneath it, which is a repair. So if the bearing, if the torque tube gets worn too much, we'll put an oversized sleeve on it and an oversized bearing, and they're mating together. Because if you buy a standard bearing, it's not going to fit this because the sleeve is in place. So once that's been done, it really fixes it forever. You may have to change the standard bearing with the aluminum torque tube every 300-400 hours in some cases, but once you put the sleeve in there, they tend to last over 1,000 or more. Walking across this thing, I'm looking at everything. Our stall strips are secure. We have no fuel placard, And what I'm going to do is on the other side of the wing, I looked at it and it had a F391 53S drain stamped on the actual drain. And this one, I looked under it, it didn't have anything on it. So it's either a Cessna drain or it's one they bought from Grainger or somewhere, but it's a very deadly mistake. It's killed some people, it's killed at least one person I know of, and it's caused a few accidents. Because what happens if you get the drain that doesn't drain off the bottom of the nut plate that's on the bottom of the wing, you'll have a standpipe. So if you put a regular Cessna drain in there, you've got as much as half an inch standpipe in there. You can't drain the water out. And it happened to me personally. I took off with one and it quit right on takeoff, and I came back, and fortunately it was Hobby Airport with a big runway, so I was able to land back on the same runway. But it's very important to check that the F391 53S or at least 53S is stamped on the bottom of the drain itself, just the engine compartment. And we want to look for things that are obvious, like ill-fitting spinner to cowling. For cowling parts, we want to look for exhaust stains coming out of these vents on the side or the latches on the side of the cowling. When we open these things, we typically want to lift up until we get a snap, front and back, and then as we close them, I'm going to show that while we're here. We typically want to push the front one and squeeze them together until you get a snap, and then put your thumb right here and squeeze them together until we get a snap. And that one's a little difficult, but that's pretty common with a lot of these airplanes. So I've covered that real quickly with the owner. Okay, so we've just opened this cowling and found the lack of cowl support rods. And again, that's a deferrable item. It's not something that has to be done, but it sure is handy to have those. So I'm gonna do a general look over while the owner is here. I'm gonna look here and I'm gonna find stains, quite a few stains on the ignition wires and all the parts that are around it have got exhaust stains on them. So I just looked at the other side, and they're very clean, but I don't see any obviously current stains, so these may be from an old exhaust leak that occurred before. We'll find that out later when we get the cowling off. One thing I like to see is good baffles. These baffles are in what I call excellent shape. They don't have any excessive wrinkles in them. The marks, the abrasion marks are good. You can tell where it seals this part right here very well. This comes up and seals right against the cowling. So all of this looks very good. The engine is generally clean on top, but I do see oil on the bottom. So with one hand, I'm going to get somebody to help turn the prop. I'm going to see if there's oil on the bottom. So I'm going to see if this nose bowl, the nose seal is actually leaking or turning. Yeah, turn it a little bit. Just turn it in either direction, doesn't matter. Okay, so it's not turning. If you get a lot of oil, sometimes this front seal will leak. I don't have any oil on my fingers after I've handled that seal, so that's not the problem. It's somewhere else. My first thing I would look for, we always have cracks on these corners with these little brackets. They're somewhat underbuilt, and I do see a crack there. The ductwork here is just like the original. The original was black, but this same material is available, but it's brown. It's not black, so there's nothing wrong with this. This is actually preferred. And when we do put those in, we bond these with RTV, and this one has RTV on it, so it's not crushed in. So every time the engine shakes when you start up, it'll tend to crush these if you don't bond them to the engine mount. And this one looks like it's well installed. It's not crushed down and disturbing the airflow into the carburetor. I do see some possible interference here with the engine support bracket, it's hitting the hinge, and when it does that, it creates a frequency that you probably can't feel a vibration, and it could disturb your gyroscopes. It could make them, in my experience is that if they're hitting there, you'll go through a lot more gyroscopes than you would if it was not touching. So that's important that nothing metal touches the frame that's not already shock absorbed. I'd also check here at the top, make sure there's no debonding. This one has a little crushing here where the cowling has impacted it during start or shut down, but it's still bonded nicely and the form fit is all good. So I see no issues with that. With this, we'll go to the other side. Okay, looking at the engine compartment, that junction right here will typically have a crack in it if it's got a lot of time on it, and if it does, anywhere this engine fails or engine mount fails, it will be right at this junction. Usually on the pilot side, sometimes it'll fail at the co-pilot side, but 90% of them will fail there. And so while the owner's still here, we want to check those things out and make sure we don't have big issues before he leaves. There's also this data plate, this inspection is required, or this placard says warning, air filter service is required. That has to be there because of an AD note. Now, it's not a repetitive AD note, but the placard has to be there. Again, on my pre-flight, I want to check these things, to make sure that the bonding is good. It all looks good. There's no cowl support rod. The snaps are there, but cowl rods are gone. This airplane has a Challenger oil filter. Thank you. It looks like a brand new rod end for the throttle. We have a good size oil cooler on it, and there's no damage to it. We'll have to get the part numbers on it to make sure there's no ADs on it. If you look down closely here, you'll see that there's a C stamp on the cylinder heads, and I like to see A is who they're made by, and B is if they have the high chrome exhaust valves, because if they have the C stamp on them, that means the high chrome exhaust valves are there, and the service bulletin 388C, which is the valve wobble check, only has to be done every 1,000 hours instead of every 400 hours. So these look good. What we're going to do, though, typically even if they don't have 1,000 hours, we're going to pull the valve covers and check to see if there's any stains on the exhaust valves or on the spring seats, and if there is, then we're going to go ahead and do the wobble check, because that tends to think that there's a lot of play between the valve and the valve guide. We've pretty much done a walk around. Our next thing we're going to do is a pre-flight run-up, and pretty much everything that's in that run-up is in your owner's manual, and that's what we're going to do. So I don't really need to have a detailed inspection. It will just take up a lot of time. So we'll proceed with that.
New York 800 Yankee Tango is inbound 4 left.
Going 89 Yankee Tango, Kennedy Tower, 4 left, clear to land, traffic to the regional jet off your 2 o'clock in a mile, Tango 1,800.
Should I have traffic, clear to land 4 left, 9 Yankee Tango.
Okay, here's the rear bulkhead, the one that was put on wrong, and it elongated these holes. You can see how badly they're elongated. These aren't elongated because the stud doesn't come all the way through all the way through the bulkhead, so it has nothing to key on these. But with these gone, it's put on wrong, and that will cause the spinner to be put on wrong. It'll be out around, and it will crack the forward bulkheads, which is a fairly common example of an aluminum one that's broken. But what's worse, these are really heavy spinners. They more than double the thickness on the later spinners, so it's a heavy spinner. And if it's not dead centered, if it's off a 1/16 of an inch, it's going to put a load on this bulkhead, and it's going to crack the nut plates in it, as it did on this one, and it's going to elongate the holes. These holes, it used to be the same size as these holes, so that shows you how bad this spinner was wobbling. So again, having all this lined up when you put it on there is critically important, or it can cost you thousands of dollars.
it'll start and moon around the washer. And they'll typically just run off one direction or another. You can see here, you can see all the fretting. And that means that the forward spinner bulkhead is going to have to be replaced. And at the same time, when reinstalling everything, that rear bulkhead needs to be checked to make sure that the holes have not been punched out from installing it incorrectly. And that the spinner itself, when it's installed, you're not having to force any holes to line up, because it's a sign that your spinner is going to be out of round. And if the engine's running, you can see the spinner bouncing up and down. That's putting a lot of stress on this bulkhead. So you want to try and find where that spinner doesn't have a lot of play, it has almost no run out, and if you've had your prop dynamically balanced, a good idea is to take a Sharpie and index all your forward bulkheads, your spinner to your bulkheads, and where everything's been, so that way you know this is balanced. Whenever I put it back together, it's going to be the same.
Okay, the idea here is to install the aft spinner bulkhead correctly. This is a huge issue where if it's not installed properly, you can moon out the holes where the dowel from the crankshaft will actually half moon the holes. So what we like to do is put these dowels on here, little pins to help us secure the propeller, and then we'll take and install the propeller. The nice thing about this is it's secure, it's not going to go anywhere. So at this point, you'll confirm that your bulkhead is installed properly. Run in your bolts. All right, so what we like to do is run your bolts in. And just before you push the bolts all the way down, confirm that you're all the way in, your bulkhead is snug against the flywheel, and then continue with snugging your prop down, like so. And this will avoid a six. So what I want to do is look at the gap back here, and I want to grab this and make sure that it is snug up against the dowels on the crankshaft. So that is confirmed. And so the issue is these are pricey, and we're trying to avoid damaging the aft spinner bulkhead. So I think we've accomplished that. And at this point, we can probably take your dowels out and then run your prop bolts down to, on a Tiger, 65 foot-pounds, and then safety, and then you're done.
One of the things that I learned, or that you should do, especially on a pre-buy, after repeated pounding of the nose gear and nose strut, or bad landings where they land, nose wheel first, you can break the torque tube. And one easy way to figure that out is to measure from the floor to the prop tip. Now the Travelers, the Cheetahs, and the Tigers all have a different prop clearance. We have 9 inches on ours, and Tiger is 8.5 clearance. So it's unlikely that the torque tube has been bent and damaged, or the joints broken. Thank you.
We just set this thing up to pull the nose gear out of it. We have tied a, I don't know if you can see it from that camera angle, but we've tied the yoke all the way back with a strap, all the way back to the steps back here, and to a part that won't move, part of the hanger. And when we tied the other end of the strut to my pickup truck, so we can ratchet. If it's hard to pull out, we can lift this thing, break it loose, and lift it up and down and ratchet it from the truck and that will save from tying onto the tie-down ring. It basically attaches strap to each of the parts that we have to separate without going through the airframe. And by tightening this up, working this up and down, you can take them out when they're really hard to take out. This airplane did not come with a shock strap. So typically when you have a boot here like this that seals that junction of the yoke and the strut together, you don't have the corrosion issues. But with the shock struts, it's open to moisture and the heat of the engine and everything. So those are usually a lot more rusted and corroded.
And those are what, like 870, 879 Tigers, Cheetahs?
From 77 on, they use and that includes the Lynx and the Cheetahs and Tigers all the way up to 2005. So water can get in there and it can puddle and it can go into the strut, and even found water inside the strut when the drain holes in the bottom of the strut are not cleaned out. There's a hole in the very bottom of the spindle, which allows any water that gets in there to drain out. But sometimes that's plugged with grease or whatever, and it'll hold water and it'll damage it from the inside. But the other issue we have also is with the shock strut. It has this yoke over the top of it, and moisture gets caught in there, and it destroys the yoke. So when the torque tube goes bad, we have to basically reject almost the whole thing. The yoke is kind of the key part of the airplane, of the nose gear torque tube assembly. Anyway, it's important to take this out and at least pull the yoke, the shock strut mount off the yoke assembly and look for corrosion there, because that's where they're affected the most, is on top of the yoke where the shock strut mounts are attached. You just lift this up and down and tighten it. And as you can see, this one is well greased, and even though the strut hadn't been out 20 years, it's been in a hanger, so it really comes out easy.
And as you're doing that, David, on a normal, really stuck one, you keep tension on it with the truck, like you keep the truck moving forward?
Yeah, if it's frozen in there, I've had them so hard that you can lift on this and literally pick the main tire off the ground and not break loose. So when it does break loose, finally you hear it sound like a shotgun going on, boom, and it moves an eighth of an inch, So now you've got to get back on it and push down, up and down, and there's a lot of work in lifting it up and down, but there's a dramatically more work trying to pull it out unless you use the straps. So the straps are so important. You got to use them, and you got to tie them to the yoke, not to the tail tie-down ring, because there's a lot of pressure there.
Yeah,
we can pull 1,000 pounds on it if we have to, but you don't want to pull that on the tie-down ring. Well, the manual says to spray it with zinc chromate and put it back in, but we typically will. Zinc chromate is not the best over steel. It works pretty good with aluminum. So my opinion is, and that's my opinion, is that either an epoxy base, something like DuPont Kolar primer, or even the Rust-Oleum red oxide, or the gray oxide, works great. And then you put it in, you coat that with anti-seize, and slide it back in, and you're basically not having any problems even if it gets wet. So that's the best way I think I can do it.
So you let the paint dry. When you put the red oxide on, you let it dry?
Yeah, we let the paint dry, and then we put the anti-seize on that after that,
All right.
Okay, so we took Bob's fork out of his fairing. One of the things we look for is the stacking of the Belleville washers. We put them together like that. And then we'll clean this up, take a look at the perforation on the bearing inside here. Looks good. We want this thrust washer to be here. There's two different sizes. This is the bigger one. The way this came apart, it looks like that they had it together properly, because what you don't want to have is this too close to this in here, which I'm fixing to show you. This will go on there. And this will set the depth that it goes into the fork. Okay, so what we've done, put a new O-ring here. We've got our thrust washer. Get that to stick. strut into the fork. And what we have is the exact depth that you want. You don't want to have too much of a gap that you get dust and dirt in there, but you don't want the gap to be so close that it tears the O-ring up. So that looks just right. I like that.
What we found on this airplane was the bolts were loose, and one of the reasons they were loose is because what we removed is a AN6-12A, and it should have been a 10. So it was 2 sizes too large, and it wasn't going to work no matter how many washers you put in there. Well, it might, but you're restricted to 3 washers according to the book. So anyway, we're correcting that. We're about to put the nose strut in, and what we've done is we've taken this and cleaned this out, and here's the nose strut. It's been cleaned and sprayed with a primer. We let it dry. And typically, it's not in the book, but what I've always liked to do, because my experience is the problem with these, they get rusted and they seize their way in there. You can't get them out. So what is better than anti-seize? So I like to put them in with anti-seize. Same stuff we do the power flow mufflers with. And if you do that, my experience is they'll always come back out easily if they get a copper or silver anti-seize put in there. And that's basically what we're going to do next is install this right there. And we'll also, while I'm showing this, I might show an example of the nose gear. I don't know if you can zoom in on this. This is a fork that had a badly worn bearing in it, and you can see the steel and then some. So it had actually damaged the strut, the spindle where the strut goes in. And so we have to, there's 2 bearings in here, and I had 2 of them with me a minute ago. But anyway, that's what's going to have to be done on this particular fork. But his is in good shape. They're not anything like this, but that's an example, extreme example of having them worn out. This is This is also a forged fork for the later 77 newer airplanes. So the stops are built into them. On the previous airplanes prior to 77, they just had a hole drilled on each side, and they had a stud with a spacer on it, and that acted as a stop. And they were much weaker. They also would bend on a hard landing, and you had to replace them. But the good thing about those is they're about 1 pound lighter than these. So if you're looking for save weight, you put the welded ones on there instead of the forged ones. Yeah, what he's doing is torquing the aft bolt here that goes in the nose gear torque tube. This is what the torque tube looks like in declutter with no airplane attached to it. So these bolts get loose, and apparently this one's pretty loose. And what he says happened on the other side, the bolts were bottoming out. You couldn't torque them because they were against the thread, so we had to pull the bolt back out, put washers, or take washers out, put it back in. The book does say as required. So we were able to get it to torque on this other side, and I think he's going to have to do that on this side too. But this torque tube is what nobody sees as a pilot. This is the yoke where the nose strut goes into, and this is the engine mounts right here, out here. So these 2 pieces here actually have bronze bearings inside of them, and they bolt to the firewall and to the floor. So this part of the torque tube does not move. This, when you hit the a hard landing load, will rotate this yoke in the up position, but it won't move this. So what happens is you have your torsion bars here, which are big springs, and they tend to absorb the landing loads. But they also are springs, so that's why you can't land a Tiger, Cheetah, or any of the 2-place airplanes too fast, or they'll bounce back in the air, and you'll wind up porpoising, and you'll lose the landing gear. So every landing is a boarded go-around. If you have a bounce, push throttle in and try it again. Slow it down more this time. But we've lost a lot of airplanes because of that. When these are new, you get 2 bonded joints, and you get 1 bolt on each side. So there's no bolts out here. It's just bonded on this end piece, and the only bolt in here is 1, and it's bonded. So what we do in overhauling these things is we we put them in fixtures and we re-drill for four bolts on each side. 2 bolts here, 2 bolts here, and these are close tolerance bolts. The way drilled undersize, we ream them while they're still in a hard fixture, and then we light drive the bolts in and put it back in the fixture, by the way, before we drive the bolts in and put bonding. It's ISOL type material. We bond it and bolt it together, but it's reamed and it's a dry fit for all these bolts. So what we started with is a part that can delaminate. If any one of these delaminates, you'll lose about 3 inches of prop clearance, sometimes just 2. But if you do that, then it's only thing that's holding the prop off the ground is the other side. So it's very important to not fly it until you change the torque tube. And these that we sell, again, have 8 bolts and bonding instead of 2 bolts and bonding. And that's what they look like. They come with the Form 337 attached, and we got them ready to go.
Yeah, it's recording.
When you're hitting your rib, and then you find it, and you go along it, and you hear a different sound. And then if you're there, and then if you go to where it's delaminated, you can hear it like that. But you're solid. There ain't nothing here. I'm just showing an example. This is a brand new one. Yeah, that's the way it sounds. It sounds solid. And then you will hear the difference when it's delaminated.
During our inspection, we found the typical problem where people read the service bulletin and service and parts manual for the exploded views on how to assemble the stops and the aileron supports. And in all of those publications, again, it's wrong. It's backwards from where it should be. And so on this particular airplane, we found that done. So it looks like it was just assembled improperly. So looking at this, the stop is on the inside of the support and not on the outside. And what happens if you let it run like that, I don't know if you can see that, but it will crack, it will destroy the aileron supports. And that's the only thing really holding the aileron on the airplane except for the counterweight. So you don't want these to break in half. And that's what was going on with this one. These are brand new, so it's not a problem. But this stop has to be on the other side of this, on the outside, so that when you tighten the bolt down, it's tightening against the steel support. And the support has a cutout in it. Now, this is a broken one. It shows what happens when somebody puts it on the wrong side. They'll have to stop. They'll have to grind the stop, as this one happened, to make it reach the travel. And this one also had the stop ground on it. So if you put a new one on it, you shouldn't have to grind anything. It should go right on, and it should meet the travel that's required. So if you have a ground stop like that, then it's probably on the wrong side, or has been on the wrong side. This one, when you grind them, it also makes them weak. So a good tailwind will make the aileron oscillate, and let me turn the telephone off. Oscillate, and it will damage or break the stop, is in the case of what happened here. So what we're doing is we're pulling this off because we have to do the AD note. The 792204 is still a repetitive AD on this airplane, so we're going to do the AMOC on it. We're removing the aileron and torque tube, inspecting the joints. There's a service bulletin, SK144, to check the joints on the aileron, and we're going to be doing that before we can sign off the AMOC, which is alternate means of compliance. So once that's done, then at this point you never have to do it again. It's that 792204, which is a 100-hour repetitive inspection, no longer has to be done. So we're going to do it on this airplane. We're going to do it to the other side also, because both sides were assembled wrong.
So one of the things that needs to be looked at anytime you're doing one of these inspections is an SK144, and there's an AD out that particularly pertains to the bonding and riveting of the joints and the sleeves on the aileron torque tubes. This aileron has already had the SK144 done to it, and you can tell because there's additional rivets that have been added here, and if you look really closely in this joint, you can see it has been bonded together. If you pull the aileron apart and it has just the 6 rivets right here, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take it apart and add the additional rivets if you can see bonding in this torque tube. If you can't determine whether or not there's bonding of this torque tube, the inner and outer sleeves, you need to remove all the rivets and then try to remove this inner sleeve. If you're not able to remove it, then that means it is internally bonded and you can just replace the rivets and it's good to go. Same goes for this end. This one is good and we don't have to add any additional rivets because it already came bonded together, and you can see the bonding agent all the way around this torque tube. So that means that it's been bonded, it's been riveted, it's put together correctly. So another part of this AD and inspection, if the SK144 has been done and you want to no longer have to worry about the AD and the inspection of the flight controls, there's service instruction 0601, I believe it is, and what that is a contour check for the aileron, and you'll have called out for in the service instruction a little gauge just like this. And what the service instruction says is you're going to come along this aileron and you're going to mark top and bottom 1 inch the entire length of the aileron. And as you go down, the only place where this should touch is at the leading edge and the trailing edge. If at any point the skin touches the middle or anywhere else along this gauge, that means that every 100 hours you're going to have to come back and continue to do that inspection. But if there is no deformation of the skin, if everything is where it's supposed to be, is contoured correctly, then that's basically saying that you no longer need to come back and do this inspection again.
Would you show that and how you hold that up?
So essentially you're going to set this fixture on just like that, and you'll go along every inch, and you'll see a very easy gap, very clean, simple gap underneath the fixture, the gauge, and essentially every inch all the way down, it should not touch on this, and you'll just measure out from one end to the other, and you can do it, and you'll have to do it top and bottom for both ailerons. And for this part, if you can see that SK144 has already been done, it's in the logs, but they did not comply with the service instruction. You can do this while it's still on the aircraft. You don't have to remove the aileron to verify that it has been done.
Oh, yeah, this is David Fletcher again. We're talking about the gouged out torque tubes on the ailerons that are real common, and also the damaged flat torque tubes. And what I have here are some samples that have a lot of damage to them. If you want to, can you scan to that? Yeah. This is a torque tube that bolts to the flap itself. That's an example flap, and just has one bolt on it, and it's bonded in with a RTV. But what happened on this torque tube is you got these little bolts that go through what they call the banjo clamp. It slides over the top of here and keys on this flap, so that when you raise and lower your flaps, you're rotating on this key bolts. And as you can see, this one is, totally screwed up. It's got 4 holes in it, and the good thing about it, if you got a screwed up one like this, you can either call Fletcher and get another one, or you can rotate it with the left-right. Because the reason for the 4 holes is 2 of them for the left and 2 of them for the right. So if you got the trouble to take the other side off, you could get new keyholes for that torque tube if it's damaged. This one is beyond repair. But these little bolts are the culprit. When you screw them into the banjo clamp, it has to be dead aligned with this hole. So if it's not, it does things like this. You can see where somebody screwed it in and it wasn't even close, and they kept screwing. And others have it screwed it in so bad that it rotated and damaging the flap until it finally got to an elongated hole and cracked it. So this is an extreme example. They don't usually look like that, but most of them have some damage on them, and so it's a good thing to correct that if you have the flaps off. What happens also, this flap goes on like this, and it actually, well, got that wrong. Goes the other way. Okay. So the keyholes will go into the banjo clamp that has 2 holes and also a big clamp you tighten the nut on. And if you don't put a washer under it, you're liable to damage the aileron torque tube. And what happened here, there's about 30 thousandths damage where it just sawed back and forth every time you move the ailerons. It was cutting a little bit of metal off. So that's another thing you want to make sure is this thing's not sticking through so far that it cuts into this into that. Should be shaped, should be just about flush, and this should be adjusted to where it doesn't touch. And that's all for now. Okay, we're going to talk about the spar bolts for a minute here. There's an AD note to replace them if they show signs of wear and or if they're high time. It's actually a life-limited item, so at 7,500 hours you have to throw these away and get new ones. And so the airplane we're doing right now has right at real close to 7,500 hours, and so when we started pulling the bolt out, it just turned real easy, and then you prodded it, it just fell out. So the threads were still stuck in the nut plate, and and so we were able to get the wing off because the head came off. So all we had to do was take the wing off normally. We take the other bolt out and all the other pieces, and it would slide off. So then we had to go inside the spar, and we could reach, with the wing off, we could reach the broken shoulder bolt and unscrew the threads, which was pretty easy repair. For an early traveler, they got the nut plate riveted right to the spar, and these are the Dash 1 bolts. They're shorter than the Dash 3. So this is what you're supposed to use on the airplanes built in the late 74s. I don't have the serial number in my head, but and earlier, you have to use the Dash 1 bolts. On the later airplanes, they had a half-moon spacer with a nut plate riveted to the spacer. So in order to get to the nut plate, you had to have a longer bolt. In that case, they tightened it down all the way against the nut plate and broke the ears off the nut plate. So I'm out there with blowing wind and ice on the ground everywhere, and I couldn't get the bolt out. So what I had to do, and I had to get the airplane out of there. The wing wouldn't come off till I got this out. So I had to grind the head off the bolt and then drive it out with a punch at the end of the spar. And once I've done that, I could get the wing off, and we could change the nut plate and put new bolts in it, the correct bolts. But anyway, in order to do that at the field, it was very difficult to get it out, to get a grinder to it, because there's a lot of interference. The rib for the wing root is right up against the head of the bolt, and so getting in there with a big grinder and trying to get the head off was very difficult. So I did I cut a top out of the wing root, which is fiberglass, and they're not very expensive because there's a lot of used ones. And was able to get a grinder in there and cut this off, then punch it out. On another part of the wing, we have in the past, and there's been several accidents because of this, this drain is the F39153S that goes on the fuel drain on the tank itself, not on the sump. And the reason it's important is because the fuel drains are below the thread. The actual drain that takes the fuel is below the thread areas. And they have drains that look just like this that Cessna uses, and the drains above the threaded areas. So what happens if somebody screws a Cessna drain in there, you have a standpipe that you can't drain off the bottom of the tank. You can only drain off the top of above the threads, or above this. So you wind up with water in there that you just cannot drain at all. And there's been several accidents. There's been possibly one fatality because of that. And I know of NTSB actually came out to our place to measure the amount of water it would hold if you put the wrong drain in there, and there's a report on that. And also it happened to me. The first time I discovered it was way back in the early 80s, and I took off from Hobby and the engine quit and dead. And fortunately, Hobby had really long runways, and I was able to turn around and land back on the runway I took off from. And I didn't know what was wrong, so I drained the carburetor, drained everything really good, no water at all, and I didn't understand the drain at the time, and I took off, and damn if it didn't happen again. So, so anyway, I found out that after that second time, we found out that it had a Cessna drain in it, and anyway, that's something I've known for a long time. This drain screws into a nut plate that's riveted to the bottom of the wing, right against the skin. And if you see this nut plate, it's got these little slots in it on each side. So the drain screws in without to declutter here like no airplane. This is riveted to the bottom of the wing, and these little rivets sometimes get over torqued and they'll pinch and you'll leak fuel, and so somebody will go in there and seal all around it, which is a mistake, because if you seal all these little holes, again you've started a standpipe. You have to leave those holes alone. You can seal over the rivets just fine, but just don't get on those little slots. I'm using a cleanup thinner here because we can use soap and water, but we're about to oil it down so the ACS 50 and the water doesn't go together very well. So I'll put a little bit of cleanup thinner in there. It gets real dirty real quick.
Yeah, you don't want to be too hard on the owner. That's 45 years worth of dust.
Yeah, 50 years, so I guess it's anyway, that's the theory behind it. It's mostly dirty out here on the end. It doesn't get that dirty down in the middle. But what we're mostly concerned about is the bottomless bar, because it's where the moisture winds up collecting. So what you'll need to do, may have to get another rag.